Firstly, our radio workshop as an organization started as an NGO that partners with community radio stations, and we train young people at community radio stations to do audio storytelling. So we've been doing that since 2006. And then about, I think it was 3 years ago, we decided to start a podcast. So the idea was that there's a lot of ideas that come out of radio stations. The young people are super passionate. They want to keep talking. Radio doesn't always give you the opportunity to really zoom in depth into an issue. So that's where the podcast comes in, is ideas and stories come out of the community radio stations. We work with youth reporters, and then we produce long form narrative audio documentaries in podcast format that then allow us to kind of delve deeper into the various issues that are affecting communities that we're based in at radio stations. So that's kind of the radio and podcast link. Honestly, I don't think so. I think the majority of the continent still listens to radio because it's the one form of media that doesn't require internet access. It's accessible in just about every language. So I don't think necessarily radio listeners become podcast listeners. I think there are two different audiences that exist there. Podcasts are, I guess they're a vehicle to allow people to learn more about a certain topic or issue. But yeah, it's not necessarily the same people who are listening to the radio that are listening to podcasts. What we have started doing is with our audio documentaries, because they're usually about 20 to 30 minutes long, radio shows don't always have that time to play a full podcast as part of a show. So what we'll do is we'll break the podcast up into smaller segments that can then be shared on air and facilitate discussion around the issue. So like this episode, for example, Zambia's Sacrifice Zone is about lead poisoning in a small town in Zambia called Kabwe. So with that episode, we split it up into sections, and then what that does is it gives the radio host an entry to talking about lead poisoning in Kabwe, climate change, and then that audience can engage with that. And they can be directed to listen to the full podcast episode if that's something they want to do. But the idea is like the podcasts are used to facilitate discussion on radio rather than necessarily build a massive audience for the podcast itself.